Hi everyone, I don't have any slides associated with this video at the moment due to some technical problems, so I'm going to post a handout to help make sense of what's going on rather than just having me speak at you. But because the two explainer videos are quite brief, I want to get right into what this video is about, which is just an introduction to Gilbert's view with respect to demand rights. So here we go. Margaret Gilbert has argued that joint commitments explain the normativity of many social phenomena, including social rules. Joint commitments generally are commitments between parties to do something together, though doing something should be understood broadly to include things like holding a belief, following a plan, or abiding by a rule. In her most recent book, Rights and Demands, Gilbert sets out to show that another social phenomenon, demand rights, should be understood as arising in light of joint commitments as well. Gilbert's agnostic about whether there are other explanations for one having a demand right against another, but at the least, she purports to show that demand rights are neither moral rights nor legal rights at their core. I'm not going to provide a defense of Gilbert's view that the joint commitment model is the only viable ground for demand rights, though it is controversial in itself, and Gopal Srinivasan points this out in his NDPR review of the book. The central question of her book is this: under what conditions is a citizen in the position to authoritatively demand that a state official act in accordance with legally instantiated human rights? This question speaks to the relationship between individuals and legal institutions and bears in a significant way upon questions of protest and civil disobedience. To have a demand right is to be, in H.L.A. Hart's words, a small-scale sovereign in a position to call the duty bearer to order. Gilbert has argued that to be in such a position is to have a demand right, such that individual citizens have the standing to demand performance of a duty borne by state officials and the state itself. In this case, the duty to comply with legally instantiated human rights doctrine. Gilbert's treatment of this question, and she admits this, is effectively to make an amendment of Hart's account of the existence of a legal system. Her central complaint against Hart's view is that it doesn't provide an appropriate ground to establish citizens' demand rights against each other for conformity to legal rules, including legal human rights. So her amendment of Hart's view goes roughly as follows. A legal system with a rule of recognition exists in a population if and only if the members of that population are jointly committed to upholding the rule of recognition as a plural subject. This is a departure from Hart's two-level account, wherein only legal officials uphold the rule of recognition for that system, and citizens in the population simply conform to the rules of the system. This departure comes in part from Gilbert's view that the existence of a legal system can be anchored by the joint commitment of members of the population to the system itself. While the members of that population must have attitudes about the legal system, they need not be specific, and this agrees with Hart, nor even evaluative. Indeed, members of the system can be critical of the system as a whole or of particular laws without threatening its existence. What matters is that these attitudes are sufficiently about the system as such. Given a population-wide joint commitment or a structure of joint commitments which themselves a structure of joint commitments among entities themselves constituted by joint commitments. So say joint commitments between institutions or something like this. There exists a legal system in which members of the populations have special demand rights against one another, both to one another's compliance with the rule of recognition and accordingly to all the rules that the rule of recognition sanctions, or that are sanctioned in light of the rule of recognition, including legal rules like legal human rights. Where citizens are oppressed through state violence, citizens can make authoritative demands against their state that this oppression cease. This sounds optimistic, But in the latter half of Rights and Demand, Margaret Gilbert argues that these conditions, at least with respect to human rights, are considerably rare, if non-existent. Despite the existence of human rights frameworks that purport to provide a legal ground for demand rights against states and other individuals within the state, Gilbert concludes that the existence of these frameworks alone does not authorize citizens standing to demand that their states comply with them. This strikes me as a puzzling conclusion, and so I'm going to draw it out over the next two videos. Ultimately, I'm going to argue that there is a reading of Gilbert's earlier work, especially her work on political obligation, that suggests we have good reason to think such commitments are common rather than non-existent.